The background helicopter noise or whatever it was we could hear. And we're joined now by the director of the gay rights campaign group Stonewall Ben Summerskill, and from Catholic Voices, Fiona O'Reilly. Welcome to both of you. Fiona O'Reilly, first of all, the bill, as we heard there, specifically gives religious organisations the right to opt out of gay marriage, and yet religious campaigners have been some of the most vocal critics of the bill. Why?
The reason for this is simple. While the government isn't trying to redefine religious marriage, it is looking to make a change to civil marriage. And that's something that affects all of us in society, whether we are people of faith or not. And the churches are speaking out because they see the grave risks that this sort of proposed legislation change brings. And they see those risks really coming from two different places. One is they are looking at what happens when we change a fundamental building block of our society, marriage. And if you change the definition of marriage, then you effectively remove from law the ability to protect marriage defined in that way. And the churches are concerned about that because what they're saying is marriage is good for children. And if you take out of law the ability to recognise and to protect the fact that it's only between a husband and a wife that new life in the form of children can come and be given its best start, then actually you're weakening society as a whole.
Ben Summerskill, what do you say to that?
Well, I would just say first, without being pernickety, if I may, Stonewall and we have never ever regarded ourselves as a gay rights group. And the reason I say that is because all we've ever sought, and all I've ever sought, is exactly the same rights that everyone else takes
Equality,
for granted from the day they were born. And the reality is there are already tens of thousands of children in this country, and the numbers are growing, who are growing up with lesbian or gay parents. Now, Fiona and her friends may not approve of their parents, but those children are entitled to grow up in the same family structure, called the same name as everyone else. And of course there's no evidence whatsoever that children who grow up with two mummies or two daddies end up developmentally, socially, sexually any different from any other children.
Well, let's just respond to those 2 points. Firstly, the scenario whereby children are being raised by same-sex couples is a very recent one. We just don't know what the impacts are. But I think all of us can recognise that same-sex couples, and indeed others who are adopting and fostering children, are doing a splendid job in difficult circumstances. However, all the hard data says that if you want to give a child the absolute best start in life, and this isn't to be disrespectful of other arrangements, but the best start in life, then you do so by allowing them to be raised by their biological mother and father who are in a stable and committed relationship. To come back to you also on the point around equality, if this legislation was truly looking to make marriage available to same-sex couples on a completely equal basis, then, for instance, you'd have to wonder why same-sex couples don't have to consummate their relationship. You would have to ask the question why adultery for same-sex couples will not actually be grounds for divorce. So there are flaws in this legislation, major flaws.
I think you've misunderstood the legislation, actually. I mean, in terms of adultery, there is unreasonable behaviour. There's been very little evidence that that has presented any difficulty whatsoever in the 7 years we've had civil partnerships, and I do appreciate there are some people, particularly in the Roman Catholic Church, who do like to get obsessed with the sexual details of things like consummation, but I have to say I think perhaps lesbian and gay people just aren't quite as obsessed with sex as you might be yourself.
And can you respond, though, also to Fiona's point, though, about who makes better parents in that sense? I mean, you seem to cite evidence that somehow gay couples couldn't be you know, as effective.
There is absolutely clear evidence now, and there used to be an awful lot of bogus evidence, claimed evidence to the contrary. There's clear evidence from places like the University of Cambridge that children don't grow up developmentally any different from others. And the reality is, let's be frank, there are 3 million children in this country growing up in single-parent households. If Fiona and others really cared about two-parent families, they would be addressing those long before they turn their attention time and time and time again to a tiny number of lesbian and gay families.
But what we're talking about here is not the individual experiences of couples. We're talking about how an institution is defined in law and what we can and can't provide for. And what we as Catholics, and indeed many people in this society, are saying is it's important that in our law we are able to recognise a unit, which is a husband and a wife, and be able to provide for that and for other relationships.
Well, but for centuries, marriage has quite properly been redefined as people's understanding of it changed. It's only 20 years ago, let's not forget, that rape in marriage was made unlawful. It's only 15 years ago that people could start getting married in stately homes and amusement parks.
Right. Well, can I come to you, Polly, on this issue of the redefinition of marriage? Is it being redefined, as you see it, by this bill?
Well, I think most outsiders are a bit puzzled by this because it is just a word. The legal status of being a civil partner, nothing changes about that. They have all the same legal rights, inheritance rights, tax rights, exactly the same. So the argument is literally about whether one group of people should be allowed to use the word marriage. It has no other legal meaning. So I think most people are saying, well, listen, you're arguing the stable door is long shut, the horse has gone, we have gay rights. We have, we have civil partnerships. We have many gay couples with children. There's no problem about any of that. So all you're left with is the empty word. And you can fight over that. But I think by now the rest of society has moved on and are a bit perplexed by it, really.
What about religious organisations? I mean, the provisions that will protect them, the Church of England, for example, do you think they should be protected?
Well, it seems to me idiotic, and it's rather sad that we have a new Archbishop of Canterbury who could be starting all over again saying, for heaven's sake, let's put this stuff out of the way. It's distracting people from who we really are and what we're really about, and pushes the church back to talking, as Ben said, about nothing but sex.
Well, let's just speak to that safeguards point. You know, it's really interesting, and we've had Michael Gove's own department coming out and saying those safeguards are not worth the paper they're written on. It's also fascinating.
Why aren't they worth the paper they're written on?
Basically because what the safeguards do is they say that the government will take no action unless in case of discrimination. And of course discrimination is a highly contested topic and area. And in addition, the European Court of Human Rights would be the court of appeal for anything that happens in this country where people take issue with the law. Yes. And the European Court of Human Rights last year came out and said if a government introduces same-sex legislation, then it has to make marriage available to everybody on exactly the same basis once that's in place. And that would also affect religious institutions.
It's a very important point.
Because is anyone going to bring a case?
Because, well, no.
Well, 200 cases in Canada since this was introduced say that's
the European Court has made quite clear time and again that family matters are derogated to individual states. But the reason we can be certain that that is what the European Court says is most helpfully Catholic Voices, Fiona's organisation, produced a briefing last year that said precisely that.
And that briefing was before the Gasson Dubois versus France case,
which
proved that actually the courts have moved on. And we have to take regard, as people framing legislation in government, they have to take into account that this is what is happening. The other thing they have to look at is what's happened in Canada, what's happened in Spain, what's happened in other countries that have introduced this legislation. And what you see is you see divorce rates rising, and you see once you put into law...
Let's just stay with the point, because this is a worry. The government has offered this quadruple lock,
and it's offered it to denominations such as the Roman Catholics who don't want to engage in same-sex marriage. But there is also here a really, really important issue of religious freedom. And there are denominations, such as the Quakers, who have all prayed, who've consulted God, who have decided that they want to host same-sex marriages. It isn't for a denomination such as the Roman Catholics to come and trample over the religious freedom of other denominations.
This is not about the Catholic Church imposing its understanding of religious marriage. The government is changing the definition of civil marriage, and that affects all of us.
I'm going to have to leave it there. Thank you both very much. Well, two Conservative